Hello again! Thank you to everyone who checked out my last video about my kind of preposition for what the next Megarare should be. And if you haven't already, then I highly recommend checking it out because this is kind of going to be building upon some of the ideas that I brought up in that last video. Now, for the most part, I think the idea was pretty well received. But the thing is, there were definitely some glaring issues that you guys, along with me, kind of discovered along the way. And it's kind of the fun part about sharing your idea, which is that you get to expose it to other perspectives that can kind of criticize and make your idea even better. So that's basically what this video is going to be about. In the background, I'll just be showing off my process of creating the next idea. But while it hasn't taken form yet, I'm going to be going over what the problems were that you guys raised. One of the problems that you guys raised was that having a dash mechanic on a Crush Megarare just didn't really make sense thematically. Initially, I pushed back on this idea because I think that in video games, realism doesn't really matter as much, and as long as you can be creative, you can make things work. However, the deeper I got into animating something like this, the clearer that it became that this wasn't just a problem thematically, but also functionally. The animation that I was thinking about making for this weapon was just not really making sense, and it was honestly really hard to think of an animation that would work with a weapon like this. The next problem was that there was a really weak visual identity for this weapon. Now, this isn't something that you guys raised, but this is something I started thinking about when people were talking about it. And it's that this weapon is very hard to categorize, and it heavily overlaps with a lot of existing weapons in Runescape. Think about like the Ernstein Chain Mace, Varric's Flail, or even the new spec weapon that has a ball and a chain on it. And all this led to people categorizing it as a flail. Actually, this isn't a flail, because a flail has a handle. Was my original pushback. But unfortunately, there just is no easy classification for this weapon. So the simplest thing would be a flail, which I wasn't very happy with. So I needed a more unique visual identity for the weapon. To solve both problems, I decided to change the Megarare idea into being an anchor with a chain. There's only one other anchor weapon in the game, so there's actually going to be a niche to be filled. And I really wanted to keep the chain because I feel like that was the most sensible approach to make a melee weapon ranged. On top of this, games like League of Legends offer us great reference material for what a dash mechanic might look like. Thresh uses a chain and a sickle, which he uses to pull himself towards enemies. However, the sickle is much more of a slash weapon, so we don't actually want this. In order to fix this, we can look at Nautilus, who uses a big anchor, and has a pretty similar animation where he pulls himself towards his enemy. Now, realistically, this animation isn't really a dash. I guess this is more of a grapple slash pull, but the functionality that we want is just simply a gap closer, which this will achieve. Alright, and in the background, we're pretty much done making the new model for the Megarare. And I also did a little bit of extra work onto the chain in the background, just to make sure that, posing and animating in the future would be kind of easier for me. And, well, I think this looks pretty cool. Now, sadly, I didn't really record myself animating this model, and honestly, my workflow is really bad, so you probably don't want to see it. But thanks to all the work that I had already put into setting up my chain properly, I was able to create this. I tried to keep the timing of this animation to be within 1 tick, since that's how we want it to function in the game. But it's also not abnormal for animations to lag slightly behind the actual mechanics of the game. And I think that's a pretty good segue into the next issue that you guys raised, which was the limitations of the game engine and having a dash on it. I think that while it may be difficult to implement, I can call to multiple examples in the game where one skips multiple tiles, and oftentimes is more than just 2 tiles. Agility courses functionally have your true tile skip a large distance, and your animation lags behind just a little bit to keep things realistic, but functionally you are in the new destination. There's also examples of teleportation in the game, such as on the way to the Mokiato. So while I don't have access to the internal coding of Runescape, I don't think that it's outside the scope of what the game engine is capable of. The one problem that I can see is that these are examples of predefined teleporting. And having something that is more dynamic in its coding may mess things up, but this is something that Jagex will have to figure out because I'm just too dumb for that. The final problem that people raise is how a dash in RuneScape would be pretty useless. This one, I'll agree, is kind of hard to see initially, but once you actually know what you're looking for, it'll be pretty clear just how nice having a dash in RuneScape will be. In general, I think the main uses for a gap closer in RuneScape boil down to 3 main concepts. One is avoiding DPS loss. While I think that maximizing DPS could be kind of boring, I think that having a dash is an interesting way to avoid losing DPS. Melee weapons are only effective when you're right up to a target, so any situation where you have to spend ticks running up instead of attacking with melee, you're just losing DPS. So having a dash will naturally solve this issue. Number 2 is to dodge or avoid damage. Assuming that our gap closer is able to skip multiple tiles, similar to how running works, then by strategically timing our dash, we can avoid multiple attacks on many tiles. On top of this, if you're surrounded by minions or walls, then we can use the dash to launch ourselves to a safe location, assuming that there is something to attack at that location. Finally, a dash can help us with dealing with time-sensitive mechanics. If something charges up over time and you need to be in melee distance to cancel it, then having a dash will allow you to either deal with it immediately no matter how far you are, or it can also give you the opportunity to last minute cancel it, again, no matter where you are. Now that we have defined these main concepts, let's look for examples of them in the game. Examples of dash minimizing DPS loss is pretty easy to find. For one, you have Inferno or Coliseum speedruns. Oftentimes in these speedruns, players have to switch over to their range gear in order to avoid losing DPS during a speedrun. In these cases, instead of actually switching over to range gear, you can just dash to your target. Having a dash will also speed up Huey kills. While transitioning between the first tail phase and the head phase, you can dash to the head in order to speed up the kill. You can even dash in between the tails when the head gets shielded. Fasani is a little bit of a fun one. Sometimes it could be a little bit hard to not lose a little bit of DPS when Fasani does his own dash attack. So dashing after Fasani goes from one side to another can speed things up. And we have a whole bunch of other little examples. We have jumping onto the giant mole when it digs away, and even just jumping onto Olm's hand after you get teleported. The point being, any situation where you want to avoid losing DPS, you can use this dash. Now, examples of dodging and avoiding damage with a dash is kind of harder to find, but it's still there. Sometimes you might actually just accidentally get trapped by Kefri Dung, and that could just be the end of your 2-way. Rather than waiting for a long time to be released by the dung, you can just try dashing to one of the scarabs or flies in order to escape. The dash can also be used to cancel Baba boulders. You can instantly avoid all the boulders by dashing to Baba directly during the boulder phase, and this not only allows you to cancel the boulder phase, but also it allows you to dodge all the damage from the boulders, as well as it even lets you speed up the raid. And finally we have Deep Delves at Doom. When the ground gets full of acid, it's kind of hard to move around, and it can be beneficial to just jump to the target instead of manually trying to move around the venomous tiles. And this example also applies to other situations where maybe the tiles around you just aren't feasible to move towards. And rather than just taking the damage straight up, you can dash to the boss instead and avoid all of that. Finally, time-sensitive mechanics are a little bit hard to find in-game just because not a lot of them exist so far. However, a really big example is from the Doom of Macchiato again, who has 2 time-sensitive mechanics. Side note, I think that this boss is the perfect boss that our Megarare would work against. We can not only fight it with our 2-tile range, but we can also dodge the acid with our dash. Not only that, we can even use our dash to follow up with it during its car phase. And now it also opens up the opportunity for melee to be even more useful when dealing with 2 time-sensitive mechanics of Doom. First of all, we have the charge-up attack that Doom performs. This can be cancelled from a distance with a dash, because it not only does melee damage to the Doom, but it also puts us right back into melee range in order to attack it again and follow up. We also have Doom's Slam attack. During this time, you have to mark an ending location and a starting location for the Earthen Shield by attacking volatile Earth spawns. Theoretically, during this time, you can spend majority of the time DPSing the boss with melee, and just mark one volatile Earth spawn near the boss. Then, just before it starts to slam, you can dash to a far one, which not only procs a volatile Earth and spawns the Earth Shield, but it also puts you in the perfect position to walk with it. And this list of uses can be increased further with future game content. Another thing that I think would be really interesting is future content in sailing. What if you could jump from your own boat onto a pirate boat and fight them directly? Alternatively, this can also potentially drag you and your boat into attack range of the anchor, and allow you to attack sea monsters with melee. Raids 4 can implement a lot of cases where it would be advantageous for you to close the distance in order to speed up or avoid obstacles. And once we introduce something like this at the top end, we can always introduce more options for the mid game and the early game, as well as for other combat styles as well. So yeah, in case you guys couldn't tell, I'm definitely a really big advocate for having a dash in Runescape. Let me know what you guys think. I'm always open to changing up the idea even more, and the only way to get a Megarare that everyone likes is to start more discussion around different niches that could be filled in RuneScape. So, like I said, let me know. Thank you for your time checking out this video, and hope you guys have a great day.